How debt collectors assess risk and value in debt litigation cases and what you can do about it. Brought to you by Kenneth Chabert at yourlegallegup.com. Your advantage if you're being sued by debt collectors. To figure out how much your case is worth to the debt collectors requires answering two questions, both vital to the decision. First, what is the chance of winning a judgment if the case goes to trial? We'll call this the legal risk. And second, what is the chance of collecting a judgment if the debt collector wins? We'll call this the collection risk. The first is a question of how well and how hard you will fight and whether you can win. And the second is a question of how much money you have that the debt collector can find if they win. And to be very specific about this, we're talking about the debt collector's guesses about these issues. They look at what they know and they try to figure out what will or may happen. Lawyers do this all the time. If you file a counterclaim, you add two more issues for them to think about. How much will defending against you cost? This is all lost money for them. And what are the chances of losing and having to pay yet more money? Do you see why I have so often encouraged people to add a counterclaim? The debt collector knows a counterclaim is going to cost it money. The only question is how much. That's a risk that the whole suit wasn't worth it. So let's take a look at these issues separately. Legal risk. As surprising as it may seem, the debt collector usually starts with very little actual idea of the case's legal merits. That's its chances of winning if it goes to a judgment. They normally don't know the case's legal merits because so few cases are actually defended that it would be a waste of money for them to try to find out. The FTC estimated that as much as 80% or even more of what one large debt collector collected was never owed by the people that they collected from at all. The debt collector has some basic information and they file suit. As far as I can tell, that is what most debt collectors do. They go right ahead and they take their chances because most people won't defend themselves. Later, if necessary, they may try to find the documents that would help them win the case. So at the beginning, the debt collector starts with a sense that it will win the case, but not by fighting. Does that seem cynical? Well, welcome to the business world. If it costs a lot of money to assess the merits of a case you think you will win just by filing, would you spend money trying to decide what would happen if they happen to fight back? Perhaps some of them do the backup research, but you might take it as a rule of thumb that the company suing you might not have done it. And that would mean that the lawyer you're talking to is basically just bluffing in any statement he or she makes to you about your case, at least at the beginning. Would they do that? You better believe it. You can change that equation by defending yourself and by knowing or seeming to know what you are doing. Once you start forcing the lawyer to do some work, you highlight the fact for the first time that they might not have what they need to go after you and that you might win the case. You also increase the dollar value of the risk that they're taking by forcing the company to spend dollars to chase you. You bring the risk to life for them. Now let's talk about collection risk. Collection risk is the chance that the company might not be able to collect anything from you even if it wins the suit. It's a much more hazy concept than legal risk for most people, and they may use actuarial tables, like insurance risk tables for example, to figure out what that risk might be, but they probably have some idea of whether or not you can pay. But remember that, like legal risk, collection risk is barely considered before the suit is filed. And again, this is simply a question of economics. They believe they will win the suit if it's filed, and it doesn't cost much for them to file the suit against you. The cost of filing garnishments at your job or taking your bank account is also low, if they can find them. In other words, they don't consider the collection risk before filing suit because the costs that they look at are so low. If you start fighting the case, though, you bring this issue to life for them too. If you ever paid on the debt, you've given them a checking account, and that is the first place they will plan to go for collection. Nothing stops you from changing accounts, though. You can close the account they know about and open one at another bank without telling them. That makes it much less likely that they will surprise you, and it increases the risk for them. Like Likewise, if you've told them about your current job, they will probably know that information. That's harder for you to change, obviously. If the debt collector doesn't know these things about you, though, can you see how you might not want to volunteer that information? Certain kinds of income are not subject to garnishment. Federal disability would be a prime example, but there are others. The less income the debt collector sees, the higher the collection risk. Although the collectors don't usually do an individual assessment of your case's collectability before they bring suit, they do know they are usually suing people without much money. You don't want to change that thought. And if you make the price of that risk, the cost of chasing you higher, and especially if you add a counterclaim that will certainly cost them money, you reduce your attractiveness as a defendant. And that's legalese for you make it more likely they'll go away and leave you alone. You may not consider this video or anything I say in this or any video as legal advice. I cannot give you legal advice, but I do know the legal process and debt law very well, so use what I say as a source of information and apply your own judgment to your case. To get more help on fighting debt collectors and their lawsuits, go to yourlegallegup.com. Get my litigation manual and forms, and defend yourself from the debt collectors.